Welcome to Positive Read-Ins. The first time I read Haruki Murakami's 1985 novel, Hard-Boiled Wonderland and the End of the World, I was in the latter years of my undergraduate study. At that time, I found the novel to be shocking to my idea of what a novel could be. David Foster Wallace describes having a similar experience the first time he saw David Lynch's 1986 film, Blue Velvet. However, at that time, I was a mere child when it came to reading. It had only been about a year before that I had the embarrassingly obvious epiphany that reading was central to knowledge and understanding, and almost completely out of the hands of the bullshit and managerial class that was already beginning to crowd in around me. Little did I know that class would take up full residency in my life about a few years after that. But reading has remained the one antidote in the fear and loathing of my new enemies. The same drive for reading, however, and my growing acquaintance with the discipline of literature has left Murakami looking a bit thin. In short, on rereading Hard-Boiled Wonderland and the End of the World some 15 years later, I'm left feeling underwhelmed. Hard-Boiled Wonderland and the End of the World shares many features with other Murakami works. The novel centers around an unnamed protagonist, our first-person narrator. This narrator is a middle-aged man, or close to middle age, who's isolated, cynical, and brand-name conscious. This is virtually the same narrator we get in all of Murakami's novels. It's the same as Murakami's first novel, Hear the Wind Sing, which was published in 1979, all the way up to the novels that made Murakami famous worldwide, The Wind-Up Bird Chronicles and Kafka on the Shore, published in 1995 and 2002, respectively. The unnamed narrator and the narration style are not the only commonalities between Hard-Boiled Wonderland and the End of the World and Murakami's other works. There are others. As the title suggests, the novel is comprised of two narratives that are interacting with each other and a struggle for the characters to cross over from one world into the other. This happens in many of Murakami's novels. There's also a wall, a library, and a librarian, a number of women who inexplicably throw themselves at our perhaps too dapper narrator. Some 15 years ago, when I was reading a number of Murakami's works, I noticed these similarities, and at that time, I deemed Hard-Boiled Wonderland and the End of the World to be Murakami's greatest realization of these literary preoccupations. Rereading the novel now, 15 years later, I think this may still be the case. That said, we shouldn't discount the great achievement that occurs in this novel. In this novel, Murakami has created two distinct feelings, and what I mean by that is the reader has a feeling that they're in two different worlds depending on which narrative they're reading. The opening narrative, Hard-Boiled Wonderland, is a postmodern pastiche. It's a cyberpunk update on Raymond Chandler's Philip Marlowe, crossed with the cynicism and angst of J.D. Salinger's Holden Caulfield, the heavy drinking and petulance of a Raymond Carver short story, and maybe even Ernest Hemingway, and the fantastic or magical realist, if you prefer, of Lewis Carroll. And the Wonderland, obviously, is another reference to Lewis Carroll there. The circumstantial evidence that Murakami used these writers deliberately could be based on the fact that he has translated Salinger, Carver, and Chandler into Japanese, and he cites those three writers as influences. Hard-Boiled Wonderland comprises the odd chapters of this novel. In this narrative, we get a number of unlikely and Indiana Jones-esque adventures. The narrator is seen exploring tunnels and crossing over subterranean lakes and up subterranean mountains, all beneath the city of Tokyo. He's being chased by a data mob, one that he works with, another is a competing group. INKlings, which are an update on Japanese mythical creatures called kappa. There's a mad professor who is an ally of the narrator, but has also implanted a time bomb, so to speak, in his mind, which will, at the end, will relegate the narrator to this end-of-the-world subconscious. And partly that's the discovery that we're having as we read through the novel to find out what is this end of the world. Other adventures and characteristics in this narrative are as follows. There are 2 lovemaking scenes, one failed, one successful, an inordinate amount of sexual speculation, a philosophy of sofas, an imaginative and excellent faux history of a unicorn skull that tracks all the way back into World War I. Perhaps too much details and descriptions about food and clothing. There's a violent encounter with the data mob, and a number of jokes throughout, some funny. The opening chapter of the Hard-Boiled narrative compares well with Raymond Chandler's The Big Sleep. As in The Big Sleep, our unnamed narrator arrives to a mysterious location for a new job. In the case of The Big Sleep, Marlowe's arriving to the Sternwood mansion. In Hard-Boiled Wonderland, our narrator is arriving to a high-security research facility. And the opening of that the opening chapter contains everything of the novel. We have mystery, we have futuristic technology, we have danger, sexual tension. In The Big Sleep, the wayward Sternwood girl who throws herself at Marlowe has the counterpart in Hard-Boiled Wonderland as the chubby girl in pink, who's the mad professor's granddaughter. The essence of the Hard-Boiled Wonderland narrative is the same as the hard-boiled detective genre that it borrows from. It's a species of the whodunit. In the case of Hard-Boiled Wonderland and the End of the World, there is no murder, there's no obvious crime. Instead, as readers, we're trying to figure out what is the nature of the narrator's clandestine work he does. He's working as a data laundering or mentally laundering data. So that's the slow discovery that we have. Also, we're trying to figure out the puzzle of the end of the world, this kind of bizarre location, and what exactly it has to do with the first narrative line. That second narrative, the end of the world, feels empty in comparison to Hard-Boiled Wonderland. Here, modernity is almost completely absent. We have a walled town with a powerful gatekeeper who blocks anyone from coming in and out. Daily, the gatekeeper opens the gates to allow these mysterious golden beasts to go out and come back in. They roam the streets. There's no real modern technology there. There's a library and a librarian and another minor character who seems to act as a kind of close confidant of our narrator and kind of give him some information about this world, known as the Colonel. No one has names in this town. Everyone is just known by their job. The narrator becomes the dream reader, and we find out about that job as the story goes on. The people in this town have had their shadows removed. This is done by the gatekeeper. He severs them with a knife. He has removed the narrator's shadow and keeps the shadow in like a prison yard. The shadow doesn't quickly die, but he quickly loses strength. And the effects of this removal of the shadow becomes the central conflict in this narrative, as the narrator learns more from the librarian about the effects that happens when one doesn't have a shadow. He decides that he must save his shadow, or he will become mindless like the rest of the people in the town. Mindlessness seems to equate with emotionless. The people who have no shadows have no clear memories of their past. They're unable to really make connections with people. They're unable to experience love. So the mind would seem to be the concept of kokoro or shin, which is an East Asian concept of kind of heart-mind combination that doesn't have a clear equivalent in Western culture. Arguably, the narrator of the end of the world strand of the narrative transforms more than hard-boiled narrator. It's the end of the world narrator that has to make tough decisions and sacrifices and risk his life more. So at the end, he decides to save his shadow, which is potentially very dangerous, and flee to this far-out location within the town. At the last moment, he decides that he is not going to escape with his shadow, but let his shadow escape by himself. And instead, the narrator decides to sacrifice himself, becoming potentially mindless, in order to stay in the town and try to convert the others in the town and transform them the same way he has transformed himself. So using Albert O. Hirschman's game theory formulation, exit, voice, loyalty, the narrator abandons exit at the last moment for voice, and that voice would be that attempt to transform the people there like he has transformed himself. Much has been said about Murakami's American influences, and those are on full display in the Hard-Boiled Wonderland narrative. The End of the World, however, seems to get its cues from Japanese literature, or at least an Orientalist conception of what Japanese literature should be. The desolation in The End of the World is not unlike the desolation found in Yasunari Kawabata's Snow Country. Like that novel, the characters, the male and female characters of The End of the World, also have this inability to connect with one another. Tanzanaki Junichiro also leaves a mark on this narrative. In the 4th chapter of the novel, the 2nd chapter of the End of the World narrative strand, the gatekeeper stabs the narrator in the eye with a hot knife. This is a process that turns the narrator into the dream reader. It's described in cringe-inducing details and has a lot in common with a Tanzanaki passage, which we'll look at in a moment. But first, let's take a look at that passage now. Next, he reaches for a dull, rounded blade from his knife rack. He heats the tip for 10 minutes. He blows out the flame and lets the knife cool. With this, I will give you a sign, says the gatekeeper. It will not hurt. No need to be afraid. He spreads wide my eye with his fingers and pushes the knife into my eyeball. Yet, as the gatekeeper said, it does not hurt, nor am I afraid. The knife sinks into my eyeball, soft and silent, as if dipping into jelly. He does the same with my left eye. When you are no longer a dream reader, the scars will vanish, says the gatekeeper, putting away the tray and knife. These scars are the sign of the dream reader, but as long as you bear this sign, you must beware of light. Hear me now, your eyes cannot see the light of day. If your eyes look at the light of the sun, you will regret it. As I said, that passage compares well with one from Tanzanaki Junichiro's 1933 novella, A Portrait of Shunkin. In this novel, one of the characters, Sasuke, deliberately blinds himself with a sewing needle so he doesn't have to look onto the face of his lover that has recently been disfigured. His lover, however, is also blind. She's always been blind. And this process of blinding that Sasuke goes through enables him to have greater contact with his lover, enables him to enter her world. So in both narratives, we see the process of blinding as a preliminary event for joining a new world, for entering into this new world and this new experience. So let's compare now the Tanzanaki excerpt. A few days later, Shunkin was able to leave her bed. The time had come to remove the bandages. Early that morning, Sasuke stealthily took a mirror and a sewing needle from the maid's room, went back to his bed, and there, sitting bolt upright and peering into the mirror, tried to thrust the needle into the pupil of his left eye. He had no real knowledge that pricking his eyes with a needle would make him blind, but he thought that this might be the easiest and least painful method. Difficult as it was to aim such a thrust into the pupil, the white of the eye was too tough to be readily pierced, and after a few attempts, he succeeded in puncturing the soft pupil to a depth of about 1/4 of an inch. Instantly, the whole surface of the eyeball clouded, and he realized that he was losing his sight. There was neither bleeding nor fever. He scarcely felt any pain. No doubt he had ruptured the crystalline lens tissue, causing a traumatic cataract. Next, Sasuke used the same method on his right eye. Within a few moments, he had destroyed both eyes. To be sure, he could still see dim outlines for about a week afterward. Then he was totally blind. Then shortly after blinding himself, he has kind of some reflection on the effects of that blinding. So I'll read that part here as well. Always before, even while they were making love, they had been separated by the gulf between teacher and pupil. So Shunkin is Sasuke's teacher originally for the shamisen. But now Sasuke felt that they were truly united, locked in a tight embrace. Youthful memories of the dark world of the closet where he used to practice came flooding into his mind. But the darkness in which he now found himself seemed completely different. Most blind people can sense the direction from which light is coming. They live in a faintly luminous world, not one of unrelieved blackness. Now Sasuke knew that he had found an inner vision in place of the vision he had lost. Ah, he thought, this is the world my teacher lives in. At last I have reached it. So again, like Murakami's Hard-Boiled Wonderland and the End of the World, we get a new extension of knowledge that comes with becoming blind. Is Hard-Boiled Wonderland and the End of the World worth reading? I think so. But the unbelievable and unlikely events, one after another, do get a bit tiring. At one point, when the narrator is swimming in a subterranean lake in pitch dark, balancing his clothes on top of his head, and having a full-on conversation with the chubby girl in pink, who is doing all the same things, I found myself echoing the sentiment of a 1998 reviewer of another Murakami novel, The Wind-Up Bird Chronicles. She expressed herself by saying, "I'd rather be reading Abe Kobo." Abe Kobo combines the strange and the philosophical in ways that Murakami does not. However, Abe Kobo is a lot more difficult to read, and for this reason, people will probably reach for Murakami instead. Even Murakami's characters seem to be aware that their situation, their circumstances are unlikely. A number of times the narrator in Hard-Boiled Wonderland expresses disbelief of his situation. In another novel, Kafka on the Shore, one character even compares their circumstances to Indiana Jones. For readers looking for a more realistic Murakami novel, yet one that contains many of the same preoccupations and still a certain level of bizarre elements, I recommend Murakami's 2004 novel, After Dark. Finally, there's much speculation about Murakami winning the Nobel Prize, and many people who hope to see him one day win the Nobel Prize in Literature. On that topic, I think it would be ill-deserved. While I find Murakami to be entertaining, this is not the life-affirming literature that you will find in the other great Nobel laureates like Knut Hansen, William Faulkner, Heinrich Böll, Yasunari Kawabata, Isaac Breshevek Singer, or Joseph Brodsky, to name a few. Thank you for watching this episode of Positive Read-Ins. If you enjoyed it, please like it and subscribe, and let me know what you think in the comments. Reading and writing are choices. Let's make them.
ハードボイルドワンダーランドと世界の終わり。ハードボイルドワンダーランドと世界の終わり。ハードボイルドワンダーランドと世界の終わり。ハードボイルドワンダーランドと世界の終わり。ハードボイルドワンダーランドと世界の終わり。ハードボイルドワンダーランドと世界の終わり。ハードボイルドワンダーランドと世界の終わり。ハードボイルドワンダーランドと世界のハードボイルドワンダーランドと世界のハードボイルドワンダーランドと世界のハードボイルドワンダーランドと世界の